I love reading about vampires, so it will come as to no surprise at all that I have yet another vampire books I read in 2024 update. So hello my fellow fantasy book lovers and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi and welcome. My name is Kathy, I'm a goth girl from Belgium who loves to read fantasy books. For today's video, I'm not going to talk about all of the vampire books that I've read in 2024. I'm going to start where I finished the other video. So if you haven't seen the previous video yet, I will link it up here so you know which books I have already read during this year. And of course, because now it is September, the spooky season is coming, and I will for sure by the end of the year make another update on this because I know I'm going to read more books with vampires in them. But now, without further ado, let's get started. The first book is the only book that I don't own a physical copy of yet, and it is Stake Around and Find Out by Evie Belknap. I was actually super fortunate that I was able to arc read it, so I helped her find little mistakes in the book, and I absolutely loved it. It is a comedy vampire book is the best way to describe it. It's not like you're laughing with every single scene that happens, but it's a lot like little hints and nods to popular vampire culture, popular vampire slayers, things that we assume about vampires that maybe or maybe not are correct. In this book we follow Ava. Ava wants to become a vampire, but so far hasn't found one to turn her, but she knows that vampires are real. So what's the next best thing to do? Of course, is to join a group of vampire hunters. And of course, this group of vampire hunters is based inside a church. It's really a band of misfits because not a lot of people want to actually hunt vampires. They are a very small group and they each have their own reasons for being there and doing what they do. And in this group of vampire hunters, you of course have the top of the top vampire hunter. She's called Helsing, of course, and she is one of the most powerful of them. But there is a little bit more behind the character than just killing vampires. So in this book, we will follow Ava along her journey to trying to find a vampire to ask them to turn her. However, what she doesn't know is that a long time ago, there was a pact made between humans and vampires that the humans would no longer hunt vampires, and in exchange, vampires would no longer turn humans into vampires. But this will all be revealed further down the book. There's so many different layers of vampires, types of vampires in this book, and I was really amazed by how well and witty written it was. It was so funny that sometimes when I was reading in bed, I could not contain myself from laughing. So if you're looking into a vampire book that doesn't take itself too seriously, then I believe Stake Around and Find Out is the best book you could read at this moment. And Stake Around and Find Out has no explicit romance or sexual interactions in it, so if you're not into that, then this is a perfect book for you as well. Up next, we have The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. This is the second book in the Crowns of Nyaxia duology. So Serpent and the Wings of Night is the first book in this series. If you haven't read Serpent and the Wings of Night yet, this is a Hunger type-esque games situation with vampires, and the one that wins this contest actually gets a reward by the goddess Nyaxia, the goddess of like the vampires and of darkness and death and gloom. In the second book, we continue what happens after those trials. And that unfortunately also means that I can't really talk too much in depth about this book. I can only tell that it continues on the story that we end up with at the end of book one. There is a lot of trauma in the second book as well. So if you find that something difficult to deal with, then I would not recommend reading this book. And fun fact, there is one phrase in this book that both me and a friend of mine were like, oh my God, please stop using it. It is "there she is." And if you use it a few times, sparsely sprinkled in, it could have been cute, but it's like overused to a point that we're just like, ugh. So yeah, I really love this book. If you read and enjoyed the first book in this series, I would highly recommend checking the second one out. If you haven't, then of course feel free to read the first one. And if you want to experience what this author's writing is like without committing to full chunks of books, there is also 6 Scorched Roses, which is a novella that takes place in the general world building of these books, but that follows different characters. So yeah, I really did enjoy this book to complete the duology, and I'm very much looking forward to the other Carissa Broadbent books because she's already finishing up the next book, which will be released in November this year, which will follow up on this book, but not exactly on the main characters from this book. And I will put the title of that book here on screen. And yes, The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King has a little bit of smut sprinkled in here and there. Up next, we have a YA book that also contained vampires. This is called The Revenant Games. So in this world building, we have humans living in between two territories, one territory of the vampires and the other territory of the witches. And once every so often, there is a trial, which is called the Revenant Games, in which humans can participate to either revive someone, so get someone who is dead revived, or to get immortality and become a vampire. So that's the vampire's prize, and the witch's prize is to revive someone. And the town where we follow the main character is actually in between these two parts, and the woods are actually divided. So the further up they go, they might get hunted by vampires, and the further down they go, they might get hunted by witches. So there's actually a pretty scarce zone that they can actually like harvest things from. So this girl actually goes into the different zones more and more, and during one of these explorations together with her sister gets captured and killed, assumingly. And the main character feels extremely guilty about this, so she decides to participate in these Revenant Games to get her sister back. Now that is the basic premises of this book. There is also the girl's best friend involved who tries to help her, and I didn't really feel any attachment to the parents of the girl. Her younger sister was the perfect sister, the sister who did everything, and she's like the little bit cast out, left out sister of the both of them. So during this trial, we actually discover a lot more about the world building, and I did enjoy this book. There is a little bit of romance in it, but it clearly wasn't for me. I prefer my stories a little bit different, a little bit darker than this one was, and I also felt the overall self-loathing of the main character not really something that I enjoy in a book. So I did enjoy the overall read, but I did not enjoy the main character, and the main character is one of the reasons that I will or will not continue reading a series. So I probably will not be continuing this series, but I'm never saying never, because maybe the second book ends up on my TBR pile someday. Up next, we have An Education in Malice, and at first I did not know that this book contained vampires. This is apparently a retelling of Carmilla, but since I haven't read Carmilla yet, I cannot account for that yet. I will be having as one of my reading goals for the month of October to read vampire classics. So we follow both Laura Sheridan, the new arrival, and Carmilla, the established student, as they are like competing amongst each other to get into the good graces of this professor of literature. Now, this professor de La Fontaine teaches her course in writing in a very particular way. They both write poetry, and they have to like recite their written poetry from different influences and etc. So the scholar aspect of this book is very present, and I personally don't really enjoy that most of the time. But with this world building, this dark doom and gloom, I did really enjoy it. You get the different aspects of making friends, of building relationships, and the two girls actually get involved with each other. Just to be clear, there is a little bit of explicit like romance parts in it, but not too heavily. This book took a turn at about the midway point, I might say, where you actually get the plot twist. So since I told you it's about vampires, you will already know, but I did not know. I did see it coming from the little hints that we were giving, and I love this book. It is one of my personal favorite books in a more academic setting where you have the school environment, which is usually something that I really don't enjoy. So if you haven't picked this book up yet, I could very, very highly recommend it. Up next, we get to another Carissa Broadbent book. This book has been on my TBR for the longest time. It is Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. This is the alternative artwork. I have the actual dust jacket up there in my shelves, but I prefer the way this looks. In Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, we follow our main character who wants to slay the Vampire Conqueror. It's really that simple. So the female main character is called Selena. She is a assassin, witch, something. You will get more explanations on what she actually is throughout the book. She's heavily trained by the Arachessen, I think it's called. It's an order of these like assassins that live together, and they all have sacrificed their sight. So she doesn't have her eyes anymore, and she almost always wears like a band in front of her eyes to cover them up. So at the start of this book, she's actually out on an assassination quest type thing with several of her like friends, colleagues, whatever you want to call it, when something arrives on their shores, and it is the vampire conqueror. The vampires arrive on the shores and try to conquer the realm, and she actually does an assassination attempt at first on this vampire conqueror, but she's held back by the order, and then eventually she's able to convince them that, hey, this vampire conqueror needs slaying, and she is tasked to infiltrate his camp to become like his seer, is what they call it. So the people that can see the future, they can also see some parts of the future. So she's tasked to infiltrate, become his like confidant, and then kill him. And that is basically what this book is about. We have this very big duology between the two main characters. At first, we don't know a lot about the vampire conqueror, but of course, as the book goes on, we get to know him more and more as well. I love this book. This book is one of my favorite vampire reads that I've read recently. The enemies to lovers is very present in this book, and there is some very explicit sexual content in this book. So I really, really love this book. This is definitely an adult fantasy book, and I could highly recommend it to anyone wanting to get into either the enemies to lovers or into vampire books. And I think this is a very good starting point for both of those. The final book on my list has vampires in it, but they are not the main focus of the book. So don't let me including this book in this list fool you. This is not a purely vampire-based book. In this book, we follow our female main character, who is actually a very cruel creature. She is made by her creator, and she is part of a race of super deadly creatures that actually helped kill entire populations. Now, in this world building, there is multiple planets, multiple gods, gods with powers, underworld gods, different realms communicating with each other. But the basic premises is that the worlds are supposed to be locked off from each other, and the main character has actually been turned to save her sister. So her sister is like the permanent thing that comes back into the book that she wants to save, that she wants to rescue, and that also keeps her humanity, because the creature that she has become or has been created as is actually a very deadly killer, is seen as like the most evil of evil in the history of things. And on the other side, we have the male main character, who is this god creature who actually destroyed a world in the past and ever since locked the realms somehow. They explain a little bit how that happens near the end of the book, but there is a book too that you definitely have to read if you want to get the entire picture. Now, this book was really interesting because it mixes in witches, warlocks, it mixes in vampires as well. And I thought their take on the vampires was cool. It's like basic, but I did really like the characters of those vampires. Now, the main evil that they try to fight is actually her boss/lover at the beginning of the book, but you notice very quickly that she only is there because she needs to keep her sister safe and not because she wants to. So the moment that she can actually turn sides and find another way to protect her sister that gets her out of that situation, she does. So by betraying her boss, or like her turner, she actually becomes allies with this god creature, and they actually go for the search of this very powerful book, which is called the Book of Azrael. That is the main focus of this story. Now, of course, the two main characters, male-female, enemies to lovers, that transites very slowly throughout the book. So for the majority of the book, nothing happens between them. At the end of the book, of course, it does happen a little bit, but I believe that in book 2 from this series, it will be a lot more present, although I'm not sure because I haven't read it yet, and I'm not sure if I will. Now, a few things that I want to talk about from this book that bothered me while reading it is the very poor writing style. Some details like shaving stuff we really did not need to know. They didn't add any value to the book. They were just really unnecessary. I felt really frustrated reading this book. It took me longer than usual to read this book as well. But I did like the overall storyline, which is why I didn't DNF it. So if you want to have a book that actually involves more creatures than just vampires, but you like a little bit of a sprinkle of vampires, then I could highly recommend checking out the Book of Azrael by Nicole. So these were my 6 recent reads that include vampires. If you haven't seen it yet, but you want to, here is my other video on vampire books. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read one of these books books, what were your thoughts on it, and what recent vampire books have you read that you would highly recommend to me? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Feel free to give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, and if you haven't already and you'd like to be, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make new videos every week and I would love to have you for every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!